Welcome back to part 3 here of modifying a YT-1300. Right now we're taking a look at putting a recharge port in the top half of the ship. I have already cut out the hole with just a standard drill bit, and now I'm just cleaning it up so it's nice and flush. This is going to be a 1/8 hole, and when we're done we're going to have a 1/8 inch drill or magnet going through it in order to connect it to the recharge port. So now that it's all cleaned up, I'm going to go ahead and test fit it here with the magnets to make sure that it fits through smoothly. And just repeat on the other side and you're all set. Now that we have our hole, we're going to need a little bit of metal behind it in order to provide a mounting point for the magnet and a conductive surface for the electricity. And now that we've cut out our metal square, we're going to have to solder a wire to it in order to attach it to the battery. So I like using this tool. It's called a helping hand, which just provides basically a third hand because soldering can be really a three-hand job. If you notice, I'm using the pin to heat up the wire, and then the wire is melting the solder itself. This helps to make sure that the solder gets absorbed within the wire and not just sit on top of it. Now I'm going to use that metal square we cut out earlier to just put some solder on it in order to create a good base to attach the wire itself to the back of the plate. When you're doing this, you want to make sure that you get solder over top of it, the wire, and so the wire is like immersed in it. You also want to keep it as still as possible while the solder cools until it becomes a solid. Now that I have my wire soldered onto the metal plate, I'm just doing a test fit here to make sure that it ends up covering the hole properly so I can create a good connection. So with a little bit of green stuff in hand, I'm going to apply that to the back of the plate on the side of the solder, and just use my fingers to push it in place. Make sure I have a nice firm flush seal up against that hole we dremeled out. And a quick test for continuity. Moving on to the fiber optics, we're going to start with an LED to light them. There are two different length leads. The longer one will always be the positive, the shorter the negative. I like to consistently put it with the positive facing the right so I can easily identify which one is which when I cut them off. This will be a white LED, and it's going to be soldered onto leads here before we install it into the fiber optics. A similar situation that we saw earlier, just put a little bit of solder on to tin the leads and repeat with the wire and then touch them together, and you got yourself a good solid joint. Once the wire is tinned as well, just bring it up next to it and use the pin to melt them together. And once again, you want to make sure that you're holding them in place as well as possible so you don't end up with a cold joint. After soldering the leads, you will want to protect them with either electrical tape or heat shrink. This is to make sure that it doesn't get shorted out. To install a fiber optic cable, just easily push it through into the hole that was previously drilled out, and then use some Elmer's glue to get a full bead of glue, a full 360 around the fiber optic. And then you will want to pull the fiber optic in and out of the hole in order to pull the glue into the hole itself. The final motion wants to be a push through the hole to make sure the glue goes in. Once all of your fiber optics are installed, you'll want to gather them up and tape them together so you can easily feed them into the LED. You'll want to gather up all of your fiber optics together and then cut them to the same length so they all hit the LED at the same point. Now that all of the fiber optics are the same length, it's time to attach them to the LED. We'll be doing that by using a heat shrink wrap over top of the LED, and then a second one over top of the edge of the LED to prevent light seepage into the rest of the model. Once you have these over top of the LED, you will need a test fit for length on the fiber optic cables. You want to maintain as long as possible to keep as much of them attached. However, you need to ensure that it is short enough that they are butt up against the LED itself. So here I'll have to trim it just a little bit shorter to make sure I have a good connection to the fiber optic cables. Here I'm using a heat gun in order to shrink the heat shrink wrap. This will ensure that the fiber optics are securely pushed up against the LED. Be sure you don't get too close, otherwise you will melt the fiber optics themselves. Now that our fiber optic cables are attached to the LED, it's time to test them out. We'll just use a standard 3-volt battery to illuminate them, and then we'll flip it over to make sure they're all equal brightness. Tune in next time as we talk about the rest of the circuit and start hooking up the electronics.